big hello to you. It is so great to see you, and I hope I find you well. I'm Kirk, welcoming you back to the channel, and we're back out in the garden on the O-Gauge Garden Railway rebuild. In the last video, we got trains running all the way round, and it's a major landmark in this O-Gauge rebuild. But there is a small problem that was becoming quite apparent when I moved on from the 040 locomotive and started testing out some of the larger locomotives that are in my fleet. During the build, a couple of areas of the curved track had just developed an ever so slight kink. It's really difficult when you're building a track bed outside to get everything absolutely perfect, and it stands to reason that there's always going to be something that just doesn't quite fit the way you would have liked it. And I've got some big locomotives in my fleet, and these just aren't getting around. Now, this is something that can afflict anybody, so in today's video I'm going to show you just how I'm going to resolve this by fitting check rails. Today's video comes in association with Trainomatic, makers of DCC decoders and accessories that are designed by enthusiasts for enthusiasts. Find the full range available to order now at tramfabrique.co.uk. Additional support comes from...
This is Clark Railworks, and this is what we do. You'll know us from Ellis Clark Trains, and you'll get the same friendly expertise with us too. We've got a huge range of pre-owned model railways from all your favourite manufacturers, and maybe some you hadn't heard of before. It's the place to come for quality. We don't stock substandard models, and everything we sell is fully tested and photographed by model railway experts. No matter whether you model double O gauge, N, HO or more, we have sought after models from all around the world with new listings added every weekday. Check out what's available now at clarkrailworks.com and don't miss out on your latest loco.
At the front of the layout is where we've got the main problem. You can see here running a 6-wheel locomotive is just popping a wheel off the track every time, and it doesn't matter which direction it runs, that's what it does because of this little tiny kink in the curve which takes it down to just below radius 2, and that's proven to be quite a problem, but we're going to be looking to fix it with check rails. But first, I want to get a better understanding of exactly what's going on, and this is important for sighting of the check rail and to make sure that it covers the exact area that's causing a problem. So I'm running the locomotive a lot slower this time, and I'm going to get the camera in nice and close because I want to understand better the interaction between the wheels and the rails, and to identify exactly where the problem is so that we can get the check rail exactly where it needs to be. And there's the pop. Let's look at it once more, nice and close, and there it goes again. It's also worth taking a look just what the locomotive does when I run it the other way through this curve. It reaches that kink, and again just after it that front axle pops straight off the track. Just to make sure that it's not a fluke, it's always worth doing it a few times. So again, the locomotive's coming round the corner and it's coming off the track pretty much in exactly the same place. Knowing now where the check rail needs to go, we're going to be laying this against the inside rail of the curve, and this is because of the interaction between the wheels and the flanges, and this is to help the locomotive by keeping the inner flange guided to the rail. I'm going to start off by drilling a series of holes which will go over the full length of the check rail, and these need to go probably every 4th sleeper gap, and you want them nice and close to the innermost rail, but not so close that the drill bit will damage the track as you're drilling. It isn't possible to use glue in the garden, which is something that you might choose to do on an indoors layout. Quite simply, there aren't really any glues that seem to really stand up to the rigours of the outside world, so instead we're going to be soldering the check rail to a series of screws, and they're what's going to be making use of these holes. Whilst I know a few of you might be a little bit reticent about the idea of doing soldering, especially in the garden, it's actually quite simple and effective. All you need is a good hot iron and plenty of flux, and believe me, you can solder to the heads of regular screws pretty easily, and it makes a good, solid, strong bond. I just took my time on this, and it was quite important to make sure I didn't overheat the drill bit. It can be quite easy to get carried away, and you end up, it turns blue and goes blunt, and you just don't want that. After the holes were drilled, I then got a length of code 100 track. This is just off some scrap 00 rail, and this is perfect for making the check rail. After sizing it up, and I'm happy now that I've got the right length, it's a case of just gently tapping in the rawl plugs, which are going to provide the good base for the screws that are going in to support the check rail. This is pretty much the same technique that I used when I was getting the track level before ballasting, and it makes it super easy to get that check rail at just the right height. We don't want it too low, or the flange of the locomotive is just going to slip over the top. Likewise, if it's too high, it's going to bring in new problems of its own as it gets caught on other things underneath the locomotive like brake rigging and such like. So we just have to make sure that we screw these in and check that we get exactly the right height before we start moving on to the next stage. As with the whole project, there's a lot of measuring and re-measuring, and before I actually do any of the soldering, I just made sure that the check rail itself married up perfectly to the tops of the screws once they were all in. Now that I'm happy with the fit of this check rail, I move on to the soldering. The first thing I do is just literally flood the tops of the screws with the flux. And flux is cheap and very effective in these situations. The actual Phillips heads of the screws provides a nice little pool that the flux will sit in and help to give you a really, really good bond. Once you've done that, break out the soldering iron, and you're going to be using a lot of solder for this, so make sure you have plenty to hand. Get it nice and hot, and actually it's surprising just how easy it is to get the screws really, really hot, and that flux does help as you feed the solder in. The idea is to fill up the Phillips head and just end up with a slightly domed finish over the top with the solder. As you do each one, once you're happy, move straight on to the next one and just keep working your way along the row. Don't bother with the check rail just yet. This is all about tinning the heads of the screws ready for the next stage, and believe me, pre-tinning everything makes it so much easier. The next step is to tin the underside of the piece of salvaged rail that I'm using as the check rail. Now this had been used in a previous layout, so it was just a bit dirty, it had a bit of ballast glue on, so just used a Pico track rubber to clean up the surface just so that the flux and solder doesn't have to do any heavy lifting to get that tinning done. Then it's time to get the flux out yet again. A flux is just so important in getting a good joint with soldering, and I also got a pair of pliers because this rail does get quite warm when you're doing this and you don't want to burn your fingers. So I get a bit of solder onto the soldering iron, and actually you don't need a huge amount for this. All you're doing is putting a very, very thin layer all the way along the underside of the rail. There's no point trying to guess where the screw heads are going to be lining up. It's just far easier to tin the entire check rail. Believe me, it's not really that difficult a job to do.
Does your home insurance cover your model railway collection? There can be certain conditions or limitations attached to your policy which could leave your collection uninsured or with very limited cover from all kinds of risks. For example, many home policies only provide very limited cover for contents kept in garages or other outbuildings, and some will only cover for collections up to a limited value. Magnet Insurance are here to help give you that peace of mind, making sure that you don't get caught out. Our specialist policies are flexible, and we can work with you to make sure that your collection is correctly covered and answer any questions that you have. Put your mind at ease by giving us a call on 01636 858 249 or visit our website for a quotation at www.modelrailwayinsurance.co.uk.
Once I'd done all the tinning, it was a case of just bending it to roughly follow the curve, and then put some flared out ends to the check rail as well. This will just help guide any wheels into the check rail section without forming an obstruction in itself, which might cause further derailment. And then it's out with the flux again. The tops of every single one of those screw heads get another quick dusting with the flux, and it just helps everything flow. Because everything's pre-tinned, it shouldn't be too difficult. I just charged the soldering iron with a little bit of solder and then remelted the top of the first screw head, and then just gently got the check rail in position and sunk it down into that solder, and then let it all solidify off. I'm not too bothered at this stage about getting it absolutely perfect. There's a lot of opportunity to adjust the check rail, simply melting the solder, moving it around, manipulating it with some pliers. For now, it's just a case of making sure that we've got a good bond, and I'm just adding in some extra flux now, and this will go up over the sides of the check rail so that when I'm soldering I can get a good strong bond right around the base of that rail, and then just add in a little bit of solder if necessary, and then work my way along each of these screw heads in turn, melt the solder, make sure that the check rail is sinking down to the right height, using the pliers again just to make sure that everything is held just right, and then I just move my way along. I find it best just to take my time, and it all comes together quite nice. A little bit of final adjustment, and then once I'm happy with everything being in place, I get the track rubber and just clean off any residue. You do tend to get just a little bit with the flux, which if you don't clean it does give you a little bit of a layer of oxide on the Pico track. So just preempting this, and visually you can see that the check rail follows the actual rail quite nicely. You want it close, but not so close that it will pinch the flange of the locomotive. Check rails are vitally important on the full-sized railways, guiding trains through tight track work and making sure that they don't derail. And visually, what we've got here, I'm really quite pleased with it. Those silvery lumps where it's soldered to the screws can be painted at a later date if needs be, and I can also add a little bit of ballast in just to hide all of that, but the Code 100 rail really does look the part. But looking the part is one thing. Does it allow the locomotive to now make it through? And that's exactly what I want to test. So we've got the power back on, and I'm just letting this locomotive run through this troublesome section. You can see there's a little bit of a sticky point, but actually it stays right on track. The slight hesitation is probably just the wheel getting pinched between the check rail and the actual rail, and that's really easy to adjust, just going in with the soldering iron, melting the solder and just easing that check rail out a little bit. Once that work is done, actually you can see it gets through again and it's much smoother. We've lost the hesitation, and that's exactly what I want on this build. Finally, I can run some of the larger locomotives and enjoy them here on the Garden Railway. Well, I do hope that you've really enjoyed today's video and found it informative. Fitting these check rails has really gone a long way to improve the running on the garden railway, and I can now use some of the larger locomotives in my fleet without worrying about them popping off the track as they go round. In the next video I'm going to be looking at some of the scenic additions that I can make to this garden railway. These will take the form of planting some sympathetic evergreen plants, and I want ones that stay fairly low to the ground and give me some colour all year round. I also want to add in a station and a little halt at the back, and that will include a load of buildings too. And the idea is to make everything blend together quite sympathetically, and as time goes on this will all weather down and really look like an amazing feature to the garden. I always say a good garden railway is something that adds to a garden rather than dominates it. I'd love to hear from you in the comment section down below. Let me know how your own garden railway build is going, or maybe you're planning one off the back of being inspired by some of these videos. Do let me know, and also maybe share some of your experiences and techniques as well. It's a really good way to share your knowledge with your fellow modelers. And please like, share and subscribe, and check out our full merch store down below. And you can also head on over to Patreon and help support the channel to keep making the videos that you want to see. But until next time, this is me, Jenny Kirk, saying you take great care. Bye for now.
Does your home insurance cover your model railway collection? There can be certain conditions or limitations attached to your policy which could leave your collection uninsured or with very limited cover from all kinds of risks. For example, many home policies only provide very limited cover for contents kept in garages or other outbuildings, and some will only cover for collections up to a limited value. Magnet Insurance are here to help give you that peace of mind, making sure that you don't get caught out. Our specialist policies are flexible, and we can work with you to make sure that your collection is correctly covered and answer any questions that you have. Put your mind at ease by giving us a call on 01636 858 249, or visit our website for a quotation at www.modelrailwayinsurance.co.uk.
Today's video comes in association with Trainomatic, makers of DCT decoders and accessories that are designed by enthusiasts for enthusiasts. Find the full range available to order now at tramfabrique.co.uk. Additional support is provided by...
This is Clark Railworks, and this is what we do. You'll know us from Ellis Clark Trains, and you'll get the same friendly expertise with us too. We've got a huge range of pre-owned model railways from all your favourite manufacturers, and maybe some you hadn't heard of before. It's the place to come for quality. We don't stock substandard models, and everything we sell is fully tested and photographed by model railway experts. No matter whether you model double O gauge, N, HO or more, we have sought after models from all around the world with new listings added every weekday. Check out what's available now at clarkrailworks.com, and don't miss out on your latest logo.
I'd like to thank everybody over on Patreon, and an extra special huge thanks goes out to our Patreon heroes. Without you guys over on Patreon, we really wouldn't be able to keep making the video content that you see on this channel. And don't forget that you can also head on over to patreon.com/JenniferKirk and check out the different tiers of rewards. Thank you so much. You are absolute legends.